There are things you see in this world that change you forever, and I'm not talking about the birth of a child or watching someone you love pass on. I'm talking about witnessing something so fundamentally wrong, so outside the natural order, that it breaks something inside you that never quite heals right. I was 30 years old when I watched a man transform into a Wendigo. Not in some sudden, dramatic way like the movies show. It took weeks. And I watched every agonizing moment of it. My name is John, and I've carried this secret for 25 years. I've never told my ex-wife, never told my children, never told the psychiatrist I saw for 3 years after it happened. But I'm getting older now, and the weight of keeping this locked inside feels heavier than the Minnesota winters I've endured in this cabin. So I'm going to tell you everything, exactly as it happened, and you can decide what to believe. Back in 1989, I was working as a forest ranger in the Superior National Forest, about 40 miles south of the Canadian border. It was the kind of job that suited me. Long days alone, just me and the pines and the occasional wolf pack howling in the distance. I'd built myself a small cabin on the edge of my patrol area, nothing fancy, just logs and a stone fireplace and enough space to feel like I had the whole world to myself. My wife Sarah had left me the year before, took our 2 girls back to Minneapolis, said she couldn't handle the isolation anymore. I didn't blame her. Some people are built for solitude, and some aren't. That November came in hard and early. By the second week, we already had 18 inches of snow on the ground, and the temperature hadn't climbed above 15 degrees in days. The forest took on that particular quality of silence that only happens in deep cold. Sound doesn't travel right, everything feels muffled and close, like the world's been wrapped in cotton. I loved it. Out here I could hear myself think. Out here, the only voice in my head was my own. It was a Tuesday morning when I found him. I'd been checking the old logging roads on the northern section of my territory, making sure no one was trying to cut timber illegally, when I saw the tracks. At first, I thought it was a deer, the way the prints staggered and dragged through the snow. But as I followed them, I realized they were human footprints, bare human footprints, and they were heading deeper into the forest, away from any road or trail or hint of civilization. I found him collapsed against a birch tree about 2 miles in. He was maybe 40 years old, though it was hard to tell through the grime and the way his face had sunken in around the bones. He was wearing nothing but a torn flannel shirt and jeans, no shoes, no coat, his feet black with frostbite. But what struck me most, what made my stomach drop, was the way he was eating. He had a rabbit, freshly killed, and he was consuming it raw, tearing into it with his teeth, blood smeared across his mouth and chin. And the sounds he was making, God, the sounds. Not human. Not quite animal either. Something in between. When he saw me, he didn't run. He just stared with these eyes that seemed too large for his face, too bright, like they were lit from behind. And then he spoke, and his voice was cracked and desperate and somehow still human. "Please," he said. "Kill me. Before I can't ask you any more." I should have radioed for help right then. Should have called for a helicopter, for medical evacuation, for anything. But something in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't crazy. He was terrified. And underneath that terror was a kind of resignation, like he already knew what was coming and knew there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. Instead, I did something I'll never fully understand. I wrapped him in my coat, got him on his feet, and half carried, half dragged him back to my cabin. It took us 4 hours to cover those 2 miles, and by the time we got there, the sun was setting and his skin had gone from deathly pale to something with a gray-green tinge that didn't look natural even in the failing light. I got him inside, built up the fire, wrapped him in every blanket I had. His feet were ruined. I knew that much from my first aid training, but somehow he didn't seem to feel the pain. He just sat there by the fireplace, shaking, staring into the flames with those 2 bright eyes. "What's your name?" I asked him, trying to sound calm, trying to pretend this was just another rescue, just another lost hiker who'd gotten turned around. He was quiet for so long I didn't think he'd answer. Then, "Michael." My name was Michael. Was. Not as. Was. "Okay, Michael," I said, reaching for my radio. "I'm going to call for help. Get you to a hospital. You're going to be fine." His hand shot out faster than I would have thought possible and gripped my wrist. His fingers were ice cold and impossibly strong. "No," he said, and now there was something else in his voice, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "No hospitals. No one can know. You don't understand what's happening to me." "Then help me understand," I said. He looked at me for a long moment, and in that look I saw something I'd never seen before in another human being. Absolute, bottomless despair. "I'm hungry," he whispered. "And it's not going to stop. It's never going to stop." That was the beginning. That was the moment I became complicit in something I still don't have words for. Because I didn't call for help. I didn't radio it in. I just sat there with him through that long night, watching him shake and sweat and whisper things I couldn't quite hear, watching something ancient and terrible begin its work on a human body. By morning, his eyes had changed. They'd gotten larger, the pupils dilated and fixed, and they reflected the firelight like an animal's eyes. And I knew, deep in my bones, that I'd made a choice I couldn't unmake. The transformation didn't happen all at once. That's what I want you to understand. This wasn't some sudden curse or magical snap of the fingers. It was slow, methodical, like watching cancer eat someone from the inside out, only worse because Michael was conscious through all of it, aware of every change, every loss of his humanity. Those first few days, I tried to treat him like a patient. I cleaned his frostbitten feet, though the flesh was already blackening and falling away in chunks that didn't seem to bother him. I made him soup, which he couldn't keep down. I tried to get him to sleep, but he'd just lie there on my couch with his eyes wide open, staring at nothing, occasionally whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over like a prayer that had lost its meaning. On the third night, he told me his story. We were sitting by the fire, the wind howling outside hard enough to shake the cabin walls, and he started talking in this flat, exhausted voice. He'd been a surveyor from Duluth, working with a crew mapping old mining claims up near the Boundary Waters. They'd been working through October, pushing to finish before the snow came. One of the guys on his crew was Ojibwe, a man named Thomas who'd warned them repeatedly about certain areas they shouldn't enter, certain valleys where the old story said you didn't go, especially as winter approached. "We didn't listen," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We thought he was just superstitious. We crossed into one of those valleys anyway, chasing a property line. And we found remains. Old remains. A camp, maybe 50 years abandoned, with bones scattered everywhere. Human bones. Gnawed on." He stopped, his whole body trembling. "I took a piece of something. A carved bone, thought it might be worth something, maybe sell it to a museum. Thomas saw me pocket it. He got so upset he quit on the spot, walked out of the forest and never came back. And that night I got hungry. Really hungry. Hungrier than I'd ever been in my life." The next part came out in fragments, pieces of a story he could barely stand to tell. How the hunger had grown day by day. How he'd started eating more and more but feeling less and less satisfied. How he'd begun having dreams about hunting, about the taste of raw meat, about running through snow on all fours. How his crew members started giving him strange looks, started commenting on how gaunt he'd gotten, how his eyes looked different. "I left before I could hurt anyone," he said. "Walked away from my truck, from my gear, from everything. Just walked north into the forest. I thought if I got far enough away from people, if I just let myself die out here, that would be better than the alternative." "And the alternative is?" I asked, though I think I already knew. He looked at me with those two large eyes that now caught the firelight in colors that shouldn't exist in human eyes, green and gold and something that looked almost red. "You've heard the stories," he said, "about the winter spirits, about the hunger that never ends, about what happens to people who cross certain lines, who take certain things, who let themselves become consumed by their own needs." He paused. "The Wendigo isn't a monster, John. It's a consequence." I should have been scared. Part of me was. But another part of me, the part that had spent years alone in these woods, the part that had seen wolves take down elk and watched owls silently kill rabbits and had learned that nature was neither cruel nor kind but simply itself, that part understood. Not accepted, but understood. Over the following weeks, I watched him change. His fingers grew longer, the joints bending in ways that made my stomach turn. His teeth loosened and fell out, replaced by new ones that came in sharp and wrong. His hair fell out in clumps, leaving him bare and mottled. He stopped being able to speak clearly, his throat restructuring itself in ways that turned words into growls and clicks. But his eyes stayed aware. That was the worst part. Behind the physical transformation, Michael was still there, trapped and watching himself become something else. I fed him. That's what I did. I went out hunting more than I ever had, bringing back deer, rabbits, whatever I could shoot. I'd leave it outside, fresh killed, and he'd take care of it. I tried not to watch, tried not to hear. But in a cabin that small, you can't help but be aware of everything. The isolation helped. No one came out this far in winter, and I'd stopped reporting in on my regular schedule, claiming radio trouble. My supervisor would be annoyed, might even fine me, but that seemed like a problem from another world entirely. Michael, or what Michael was becoming, started spending more time outside. At first he'd just stand at the tree line, swaying slightly, his elongated form casting impossible shadows in the moonlight. Then he'd disappear for hours, sometimes days, and come back looking different. More complete. More wrong. But here's what I've never told anyone, what sounds crazy even to my own ears. He never hurt me. Not once. Even as he became less human, even as the hunger consumed him, he'd keep his distance from the cabin when I was inside. He'd wait until I left food out, then approach carefully, almost respectfully. And sometimes, in those early morning hours before dawn, I'd look out the window and see him sitting in the snow, staring at the cabin with those luminous eyes, and I swear I could still see something human in there. Something grateful. I was protecting a monster. I knew that. But I was also keeping company with the last shreds of a man who'd begged me to kill him rather than let him complete his transformation alone. And in those frozen Minnesota nights, with the temperature dropping to 30 below and the stars so bright they hurt to look at, that distinction seemed to matter. The end came in late January, during a cold snap that froze the sap inside the pine trees and made them crack like gunshots in the night. I'd known it was coming. You don't spend 3 months watching something like that without developing a sense for when the final stage is approaching. Michael had stopped coming close to the cabin entirely by then. I'd catch glimpses of him in the deep forest, a tall, skeletal figure that moved between the trees with a grace that was terrible and beautiful all at once. Then one morning I found tracks in the snow leading away from my cabin. Not Michael's tracks, these were from snowmobiles, 3 of them, coming in from the logging road. They'd circled my property, come close to where Michael usually stayed. I felt my stomach drop. Someone was looking for something. Or someone. I found the note wedged in my door that afternoon. Lost surveyor possibly in area. Michael Thorson, 41, missing since October. Search party operating in Sector 7. Contact immediately with any information. There was a phone number for the county sheriff. That night, I sat by the fire and tried to think of what to do. If I told them the truth, they'd think I was insane. If I lied and they found him, found what he'd become, they'd either kill him or worse, try to capture him, study him, turn him into some kind of government experiment. And Michael, the human part that might still be in there somewhere, would be trapped in that body for God knows how long, unable to die, unable to escape. I made my decision. I packed supplies, loaded my rifle, and headed out into the coldest night of the winter. It took me 4 hours to find him. He was in a clearing I'd never seen before, a place where the trees grew in a perfect circle around a space of untouched snow. He was standing in the center, and in the moonlight I could finally see what he'd become. The thing in that clearing was maybe 8 feet tall, thin as starvation itself, its limbs too long and bent at too many angles. Its skin was the color of old bone, stretched tight over a frame that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts of different animals. But the eyes, those enormous luminous eyes, were still Michael's. Still aware. Still suffering. I raised my rifle. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. This wasn't like hunting deer. This wasn't like putting down an injured animal to end its suffering. This was something else entirely. Michael, I said, my voice cracking. If you can understand me, if any part of you is still in there. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't help you. I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with those terrible, beautiful eyes. And then, and I'll never forget this, it knelt down. Slowly, carefully, it lowered itself onto the snow and bowed its head, exposing the back of its neck. It was asking me. After all this time, it was still asking me to end it. I pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the frozen forest like the world breaking apart. The creature fell forward into the snow and was still. I waited, expecting it to move to get back up, because things like that don't die from a single bullet. But it didn't move. It just lay there, and as I watched, something seemed to leave it. Not a visible thing, just a sense of presence, of weight, lifting up and dispersing into the cold night air. I buried the body. Spent 2 days digging through frozen earth with a pickaxe and shovel, creating a grave deep enough that animals wouldn't find it, in a place I knew no one would ever look. I marked it with a simple cairn of stones, nothing that would draw attention. And I never told anyone where it was. When the search party came through a week later, I told them I'd seen a man matching Michael's description heading north toward Canada back in early November, that he'd seemed disoriented and refused help. They thanked me, made some notes, and moved on. The case eventually went cold. Michael Thorson was listed as missing, presumed dead from exposure, which, in a way, was true. That was 25 years ago. I'm 55 now, living in the same cabin, still patrolling the same forests. People ask me sometimes why I never left, why I stay out here alone when I could retire, move somewhere warm, spend time with my grandchildren. I tell them I like the quiet. That's not the whole truth. The truth is, I stay because I'm the only one who knows what's buried in these woods. I'm the only one who remembers Michael Thorson, not as a missing person or a statistic, but as a man who fought against something impossible and lost. I'm the only witness to his transformation, his suffering, and his final request. Sometimes, on the coldest nights, I think I can hear something moving through the trees. Probably just the wind. Probably just my imagination. But I keep my rifle loaded anyway, and I keep watch because if there's one thing I learned from Michael, it's that the old stories exist for a reason. The warnings are real. And the line between human and monster is thinner than any of us want to believe. I've lived with this secret for so long it's become part of me, like scar tissue over an old wound. I don't know if telling this story makes me brave or foolish or just old enough not to care anymore about what people think. But I needed to say it out loud, needed to put words to what I saw, before I get too old and the story dies with me. Michael Thorson was a real person. He had a family somewhere, people who probably still wonder what happened to him. And he deserved better than what he got. We all do. But sometimes the world doesn't care what we deserve. Sometimes it just takes until there's nothing left but hunger and cold and the terrible choice between becoming a monster or dying like a man. I watched a Wendigo transformation. It was the most frightening thing I've ever witnessed. Not because of what he became, but because I saw how thin the boundary is, how easily we can slip from one side to the other. And I live with the knowledge that under the right circumstances, with the wrong choices, any one of us could end up in that clearing, kneeling in the snow, asking someone to end our suffering. That's my confession. That's my burden. And now it's yours too. Thanks for following the story. If you can, leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps YouTube share our content with more people. Also, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. That way we'll know where our viewers are from. Check out the other stories too. See you next time. Bye.